We're here this afternoon to talk about carryover. It's a new topic for me to talk about. I just started teaching classes on this about two years ago, and it's a really fun topic, so I hope you'll enjoy today. You all received a handbook that looks like this on the front, slide number 1, Carryover Techniques. And then you also received a handout called the R Dialogue. Do you see that one? And you have another one, is that right? Forgetting. What is the other one called? Oh, creativity. Okay, creativity. Let's look at that creativity one for a moment first. Let me show you a couple statements from some of the bigwigs in our profession over the years. This is James Carroll. He was an ASHA president, and he also wrote a book on articulation and a phonetics textbook that was widely used in the 70s and 80s. There is no substitute for creative imagination in planning teaching activities of any kind. That is buried somewhere in that handout that you have there. That handout is there to remind us that what we do is, as therapists, is be very creative and make up things. And there's no place where that applies more regularly than it does with carryover. Carryover is actually not something that people have talked about very much. If you read a Artic textbook, most textbooks say nothing about it at all, but there are some that do, and I will point out some of the good ones today. The topic of carryover is something that most therapists grapple with certain clients, but not with all clients. For example, a therapist called me or sent me an email this past spring. And she said she had a 5-year-old boy with a distorted R who did really well in therapy. He did nicely on his R's. He could produce R words without much problem. And then she dismissed him from therapy. And she tested him a year later, and she found that he had failed. But this was the policy that they were using. They worked with kids until they could do R's correctly in words, and then they dismissed him and checked him a year later. But he had no carryover whatsoever. And I think most of us in the room could figure out why this failed. And if you look at that list there, these I think were the problems. That producing words is not the same thing as engaging in conversation. Sometimes in therapy, you know, we pull out that 40,000 selected words book and we just do words and words and words and words, and we assume that if, you know, the kid comes to therapy every day for 2 years and he works on S words or R words or whatever it is, that he will automatically carry over. Some kids do, and we love those kids, but some kids just simply don't. The other thing is that working inside the therapy room is very different from the kid having to do this outside in the real world. And I will use that phrase, the real world. I'm sure that most of you use that phrase too. The third thing is speaking to a therapist is different than speaking to other people. So we usually develop good rapport with kids, and they like to work with us. They'll do anything we want. But other people, they don't have that kind of trust and that kind of working relationship with, so that changes it quite a bit. When we help them monitor their own speech, that's very different from them learning to monitor their own speech themselves, and this sometimes is the breakdown point for carryover. I'm sure you've worked with kids who can do their sounds perfectly well, or their words, whatever it is, as long as they're in your room, but as soon as they walk out the door and go to another room, they completely forget what it was that they were supposed to be doing. And then the ability to speak well is not equal to the willingness to speak well. And some of our kids just don't even have any drive to do this other than when we're there cheering them on and so forth. And then this therapist was using cues for this child to produce R. So we know that using cues with a kid helps, but they sometimes can't do the skill, whatever it is, unless you're using the cues. So performing with cues is not the same as performing without cues. So I think that this therapist in this situation missed all of these points all the way down. And so this child obviously needed to get back into therapy and so forth. You see that sad puppy there? That's the sad, non-carried over kind of concept there. All right, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about these 11 topics. Carryover can be discussed from multiple angles. And so we're going to talk about the traditional outline of articulation therapy. We're going to talk about conversational speech, self-monitoring, behavior management, rate control, games, demonstrations, scripts, homework, attitude and emotion, and personality. I think that at least these 11 topics fit into this topic here. We're going to be talking for 3 hours, and we'll have a break in between. And we'll have time for questions and comments as we go through. So again, every few minutes I may say to you, are there any questions or comments? This is a great time to ask those freely. But first, before we go, I want to ask you, you have certain kids in mind that you're thinking about when you think about carryover problems? And would any of you like to describe this client of yours? Purple, yes? What are you thinking about? Oh, here's a microphone for you.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Remember, you're just talking to other SLPs. So.
She's third grade and just working on R, and she can do it perfectly in therapy, but I hear in conversation, she can do it in sentences, but then carry over to conversation is just not there.
She can do it in sentences with you in your room?
Yes, right.
And she can do R and all, consonantal R, vocalic
yes,
R, clusters, all of that?
Blends,
And she's a bright girl?
Yes.
Average
very
intelligence
bright, average,
or above?
yes.
And do you have any sense of what causes the breakdown outside there? She just doesn't think about it?
Yeah.
She's
a
too
little on the
busy.
shy side, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
Okay.
No, I don't. She's fairly new to me, so she's
Okay.
new this year to our school. So
Thank you for that example. You're bringing up the concept that so many of us face, which is we don't really know why this isn't happening. One of the reasons I love working with preschool kids is whatever you teach them just tends to blend into their whole life right away. But as kids get a little older, sometimes there's just this disconnect. All right.